People always say trust is the foundation of a marriage. I used to believe that. Now I think something else matters just as much: reality. Because trust can survive mistakes, it can survive misunderstandings, sometimes it can even survive betrayal, but it cannot survive a person who keeps convincing you that reality itself is wrong. For 22 years, Marcus made me question my own eyes. Not all at once, never dramatically. The process happened so slowly that I barely noticed it. One conversation at a time, one accusation after another, one apology I didn't owe. Until eventually I became a woman who apologized simply for asking ordinary questions. "Where were you this afternoon?" "I told you." "I know, I just wondered why." "There you go again." Again. That word followed me everywhere. Again, as though I spent every waking moment interrogating him, as though curiosity had become a crime. I wasn't trying to investigate my husband. I was trying to participate in my own marriage. Marcus always described himself as a private person. At first, I admired that. Everyone deserves personal space. Healthy marriages aren't built by monitoring one another. I believed that with all my heart. But over the years, privacy slowly became secrecy, then secrecy became isolation, and somehow, isolation became my fault. If Marcus stepped outside to answer a phone call, I ignored it. If he left the room whenever his cell phone rang, I pretended not to notice. If he returned home hours later than expected, I accepted whatever explanation he offered. Traffic, unexpected client meetings, dinner with investors, flight delays, construction emergencies. There was always another reason, always another explanation. Whenever a tiny voice inside me whispered that something didn't feel right, Marcus immediately silenced it. "You've been watching too many television dramas." "I wasn't accusing you. You were thinking it." "No, you don't trust me." Eventually, I stopped defending myself, because no matter what I said, the conversation always ended the same way, with me apologizing. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I don't know." Exactly. I often apologized for things I couldn't even identify. Looking back now, I realized that confusion wasn't accidental. It was useful. Confused people stop asking difficult questions. Marcus understood that long before I did. Friends admired our marriage. "You two hardly ever fight." I smiled politely every time someone said it. The truth was simpler. You can't argue when only one person is allowed to ask questions. Silence looks remarkably similar to peace, especially from the outside. We met when I was 24. Marcus had already built a successful financial consulting business. He was intelligent, charming, confident without seeming arrogant. The kind of man who remembered birthdays, opened doors, and always sent flowers after disagreements. Everyone adored him. My parents, my sisters, our church community, even strangers trusted Marcus within minutes. He possessed that rare ability to make people feel important, including me, especially me. During our engagement, he used to say something that sounded romantic. "I'll always protect you from unnecessary worries." At 24, those words felt comforting. At 46, I finally understood what they actually meant. He decided which worries I deserved to know. Everything else remained his secret. The first few years of marriage were genuinely happy, or at least they felt that way. We bought our first home, welcomed our daughter, Jasmine. 3 years later, our son, Caleb, completed our little family. Life settled into comfortable routines: school events, Sunday church, family vacations, holiday traditions. Marcus worked long hours, but I never complained. His success gave our children opportunities I never had growing up. I believed sacrifice was simply part of building a future together. Then little things started changing, not enough to alarm anyone, just enough to create tiny cracks. Marcus opened separate business accounts. It makes taxes easier. He changed passwords more frequently. Cybersecurity. He started taking more overnight trips. The firm's expanding. Each explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. Individually. Problems rarely announce themselves dramatically. They arrive disguised as ordinary life. One Saturday afternoon, while balancing the household budget, I noticed a transfer between two accounts. The amount wasn't enormous, just enough to catch my attention. When Marcus came home, I mentioned it casually. "I noticed a transfer yesterday." He looked at me. "What transfer?" "Between the business accounts." His smile disappeared instantly. "Were you looking through my accounts?" I blinked. "I was paying bills. So you were checking my finances?" "No, I was balancing ours. They're the same thing." The conversation escalated so quickly I barely understood what had happened. By bedtime, Marcus wasn't discussing the transfer anymore. He was discussing my behavior. "You've become controlling." I asked one question. "You invaded my privacy." "I didn't. You don't trust me." Somehow, by the end of the night, I apologized. Again. The transfer was never mentioned afterward. Not by him, not by me. That became our pattern. Questions disappeared. Guilt remained. Months turned into years. I slowly trained myself not to notice strange deposits, not to wonder why Marcus received late-night phone calls, not to ask about business trips extending unexpectedly. Peace became easier than curiosity, or so I convinced myself. One Saturday afternoon, Jasmine visited with her husband. While helping prepare lunch, she studied me quietly. "Mom?" "Can I ask you something?" "Always." She hesitated. "Are you happy?" The question caught me completely off guard. "Of course." She looked unconvinced. "You don't laugh as much anymore." I smiled. "I'm getting older." "No." She gently touched my hand. "You're getting quieter." After she left, her words lingered. Quieter. She was right. I had become quieter. Not because life naturally changes people, because I had learned that silence prevented conflict, silence prevented accusations, silence prevented another lecture about trust. Sometimes the most dangerous changes happen so gradually you mistake them for maturity. I mistook mine for patience. It wasn't patience, it was surrender. The beginning of the end arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Marcus walked into the kitchen talking on his cell phone. The moment he saw me, he immediately ended the call. Too quickly, almost instinctively. I noticed, not because I was searching for evidence, because anyone would have noticed. He slipped the phone into his pocket. "What?" "Nothing. You looked at me." "I was wondering if you wanted dinner." He narrowed his eyes. "You're doing this again." "Doing what?" "Trying to figure out who I was talking to." "I wasn't. You always assume the worst." I stood there completely bewildered. I literally asked about dinner. Marcus shook his head as though I had disappointed him. "I don't know why you insist on creating problems that don't exist." Then he walked upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen, holding 2 dinner plates, wondering how a conversation about food somehow became another argument about my character. I served dinner anyway. We ate quietly. He watched the evening news. I washed dishes. Life continued. From the outside, nothing looked unusual, but somewhere deep inside me, something had begun asking a question I could no longer silence. What if I wasn't imagining anything at all? What if the problem had never been my lack of trust, but the fact that Marcus desperately needed me to doubt myself? At the time, I had no idea that question would eventually lead to a forgotten device beneath the driver's seat of an old car, and that my husband's own voice would one day reveal everything he spent years insisting existed only in my imagination.
The question refused to leave me, not because I suddenly distrusted Marcus, because I no longer trusted my own reactions. That realization frightened me more than anything else. When you begin doubting yourself before doubting someone else's behavior, something inside your life has shifted in ways that are difficult to explain. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. Marcus was already dressed, standing in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting his tie. He smiled when he noticed me watching him. "Morning?" "Morning. I've got meetings all day." I figured. He sprayed cologne, gathered his briefcase, and checked his phone twice before slipping it into his jacket pocket. Normal. Everything looked perfectly normal. He kissed my forehead. "I'll probably be late." "What time?" "Not sure." Another vague answer. Months earlier, I would have asked where the meetings were, who he was meeting, whether I should save dinner. Instead, I simply nodded. "Drive safely." He smiled. "That's better." "What is?" "You've stopped worrying so much." The compliment felt strange because it wasn't really a compliment. He wasn't praising my peace, he was praising my silence. After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the coffee he hadn't finished. Steam still rose from the mug. Tiny details suddenly caught my attention. Marcus never left without checking his phone 3 times. He always carried 2 briefcases when traveling overnight. He never discussed clients by name anymore. Not because I had become suspicious, because habits become visible once you stop explaining them away. I spent the morning cleaning, laundry, dusting, changing bed sheets. Ordinary chores have a way of calming anxious thoughts, at least they used to. Around noon, my phone rang. Jasmine. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart. What are you doing?" "Cleaning." She laughed softly. "So, everything." "Pretty much." Her voice became gentler. "I wasn't trying to upset you yesterday." "I know. She hesitated. "I miss hearing you laugh." The words lingered after we ended the call. I missed it too. That afternoon, I decided to organize old family photographs. Boxes filled an entire closet upstairs. Vacations, birthdays, school plays, anniversaries. As I flipped through them, I noticed something unsettling. Marcus smiled differently in older pictures. The expression reached his eyes. The laughter looked effortless. Somewhere along the way, his smiles became performances. Or maybe mine did. Memory has a funny habit of rewriting itself once the truth begins knocking. Around 6 o'clock, Marcus still hadn't called. Dinner sat warming in the oven. 7 o'clock passed, then 8. Finally, just after 8:30, my phone buzzed. "Sorry." His voice sounded rushed. The meeting ran longer than expected. "Everything okay?" "Fine." "When do you think you'll be home?" "Probably another hour." I looked at the untouched dinner. "I'll keep it warm. Don't wait up." The call ended quickly. I carried my plate to the dining table anyway. Eating alone had become routine. At first, I hated it. Later, I accepted it. Eventually, I stopped noticing. That's the dangerous thing about disappointment. Human beings adapt, not because disappointment hurts less, because carrying constant pain becomes exhausting. By the time Marcus came home, I was reading in bed. He quietly changed clothes, slipped beneath the blankets. "Sorry about tonight." "It's all right." He reached for my hand. "I appreciate you understanding." I looked at him in the darkness. Did I understand, or had I simply stopped asking? The difference suddenly mattered.
Weeks passed. Life continued with the same familiar rhythm. Marcus traveled, returned, left again. Our conversations became increasingly practical. Groceries, bills, holiday plans, the weather, everything except what actually mattered. One Saturday morning, Caleb called from another state. His engineering job kept him busy, but he never forgot to check on me. "How's Dad?" I smiled despite myself. "Busy." He always is. There was affection in his voice. Respect. The children still saw the father they had grown up admiring. I wanted to protect that image, even if I wasn't entirely sure why anymore. Then Caleb asked something unexpected. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "Do you ever feel like Dad keeps everyone at arm's length?" The question startled me. "What makes you say that?" "I don't know." A pause. "It always feels like we're invited into his life. Instead of sharing it?" His silence answered for him. After we hung up, I sat quietly for nearly an hour. Had the children noticed what I spent years explaining away? Maybe they hadn't ignored the distance. Maybe they'd simply learned to live around it. That realization stayed with me for days. Then something happened that should have been insignificant. Marcus received a package. Small, plain brown box, no company logo, no return address. He happened to be in the shower when it arrived. The delivery driver asked for a signature. I signed, placed the box on the kitchen counter. When Marcus came downstairs and saw it, his reaction was immediate. "Who signed for this?" "I did." "You shouldn't sign for my deliveries." I frowned. The driver just needed, "Don't you know what's inside?" I wasn't trying to open it. "I know." His tone softened slightly. "But I'd rather handle my own business." Business. Everything became business. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet the tension in his face didn't. He picked up the box, carried it directly into his office, closed the door. I never saw it again. That night, I lay awake, listening to the faint sound of drawers opening and closing downstairs. At nearly midnight, Marcus finally came to bed. "What were you doing?" He answered without hesitation. "Work." No further explanation, no details offered, none requested, because I already knew what would happen if I asked. The next morning, while watering flowers on the front porch, Linda, neighbor, waved from across the street. "Morning, Angela." "Morning." She walked over carrying homemade banana bread. "I had extra." We chatted for a few minutes about gardens and grandchildren, completely ordinary conversation. Then she casually mentioned something that stopped me cold. "I saw Marcus downtown yesterday." I smiled automatically. "Oh." He looked busy. I nodded. "He usually is." Linda left. "He must have had a nice lunch, though." "What do you mean?" I almost waved. She smiled innocently. "But he seemed deep in conversation with that woman." The watering can nearly slipped from my hands. "What woman?" "Oh." She looked embarrassed. "Maybe she was a client." I forced another smile. "I'm sure she was." Linda nodded, satisfied. "I'm probably reading too much into it." Maybe, maybe not. After she left, I stood motionless beside the flower bed. For years, Marcus insisted I imagined problems, yet no one had imagined Linda's observation. She wasn't accusing him. She wasn't suspicious. She simply described what she had seen. A lunch, a woman, a conversation. Facts. Nothing more, nothing less. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I'd buried beneath countless apologies. What if trusting myself wasn't the same as accusing him? What if noticing reality wasn't controlling? What if asking questions wasn't the problem at all? I still didn't have answers, but somewhere beyond my understanding, the truth already existed.
quietly waiting, not inside Marcus's explanations, but inside something he believed no one else would ever hear, his own voice.
The separation happened quietly. There were no broken dishes, no screaming matches, no dramatic scene on the front lawn for the neighbors to whisper about. Just two people who had slowly stopped recognizing the marriage they once believed would last forever. Looking back, I can't point to one moment when everything ended. It ended a little at a time. One canceled vacation, one unanswered question, one lonely dinner, one apology after another, until eventually there wasn't enough of us left to save. Marcus was the one who suggested separating. I think we both need space. His voice sounded calm, almost rehearsed. I remember staring at the coffee cup in my hands instead of looking at him. Is there someone else? The question escaped before I could stop it. He sighed heavily. There it is. What? The accusations. I asked one question. You always assume the worst. No. I looked up. I asked because we're talking about ending a 22-year marriage. He shook his head slowly. This is exactly why we're here. For a moment, I actually wondered whether he was right. Maybe I had become suspicious. Maybe I had created problems where none existed. Then another thought quietly appeared. If asking whether another person exists during a separation is unreasonable, when is it reasonable? Marcus packed a suitcase that weekend. Not much, a few business suits, casual clothes, his laptop, some files from his office. He said he'd stay in a furnished apartment until we decided what came next. Jasmine cried. Caleb flew home for 2 days. Both children hoped the separation would only be temporary. So did I, at least in the beginning. The first month felt strangely peaceful, not happier, just quieter. No one criticized the way I asked questions. No one accused me of imagining things. No one turned ordinary conversations into arguments about my character. I noticed something surprising. I slept through the night again. That hadn't happened in years. Around 6 weeks after Marcus moved out, my attorney suggested gathering financial paperwork. Just routine, she smiled reassuringly. We need a complete picture of your marital assets. I nodded. Marcus had always handled the investments, retirement accounts, business records, tax planning. He enjoyed numbers. I enjoyed people. We divided responsibilities naturally. Or so I thought. When I asked Marcus for copies of certain documents, he answered politely, I'll send everything. Some records arrived, others didn't. Whenever my attorney requested missing statements, another explanation appeared. The accountant still has them. They're archived. The bank changed systems. Nothing sounded impossible, just delayed. Weeks became months. Eventually, my attorney frowned while reviewing the paperwork. There are gaps. What kind of gaps? Transfers. Transfers? She pointed towards several statements. Money leaves one account, I nodded, but never appears in another account we know about. I stared at the numbers without understanding them. I'm sure there's an explanation. She looked at me kindly. There might be. Then she paused. But explanations usually come with documentation. Marcus promised additional records, again. They never arrived. Every delay seemed small by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. One afternoon, nearly 4 months after our separation, Marcus called unexpectedly. Hey. Hi. He finally traded in the Lexus. The silver Lexus. He had driven it for almost 9 years. Countless business trips, family vacations, airport runs, school pickups. It had been part of our everyday life for nearly a decade. Oh, he forgot there might still be some of your things inside. I don't think so. Would you mind checking before the dealership finishes detailing it? Of course. I'll leave the keys under the flower pot. Simple enough. The next morning, I drove to the apartment complex where Marcus had been staying. The Lexus sat in the parking space looking exactly as it always had. Silver paint, tan leather interior, coffee stain near the center console that Caleb spilled years ago, a tiny scratch Jasmine accidentally made with her bicycle. Cars quietly collect family history, even after families began falling apart. I unlocked the driver's door. The familiar scent greeted me immediately. Leather, coffee, Marcus's cologne. For one brief moment, memories returned faster than pain. Road trips singing with the children, late-night drives home after church Christmas concerts, stopping for ice cream on summer evenings, back when life felt uncomplicated. I searched the glove compartment first. Old insurance cards, maps, a flashlight, nothing important. The trunk contained a folded picnic blanket, Jasmine's forgotten soccer chair, an umbrella. Still nothing. I almost left, then I noticed crumbs beneath the driver's seat. The dealership would appreciate a cleaner car. Besides, vacuuming would only take a few minutes. The small handheld vacuum sat in the garage at the apartment. Marcus had already packed most of his belongings. Apparently, he forgot that too. I plugged it into the outlet near the parking area and began cleaning. Receipts, loose coins, an old pin, a bottle cap. Nothing unusual. As I reached farther beneath the driver's seat, my fingers brushed against something hard, small, rectangular, black. At first, I assumed it was a portable battery pack, or perhaps an old GPS tracker. I pulled it into the light. It fit easily in the palm of my hand. Dust covered most of its surface. There was only one button visible, and a tiny digital screen. I frowned. What is this? Turning it over, I finally noticed faded silver lettering. Digital voice recorder. Strange. Marcus never mentioned owning one. Curious, I pressed the power button. The screen flickered. Battery still worked. A list of recordings immediately appeared. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each labeled only by date. The oldest recording stretched back several years. My first thought was surprisingly innocent. Business meetings. Marcus often dictated notes while traveling. Perhaps this helped him remember client information. I considered placing it back beneath the seat. After all, it belonged to him. Then another thought interrupted. If it contained work information, the dealership might throw it away. I should probably return it. To make sure it still functioned, I pressed play. Static filled the tiny speaker. Then traffic noise, a car engine, the faint sound of a radio playing somewhere in the background. Exactly what I expected. I almost stopped the recording. Then Marcus began speaking. His voice sounded relaxed, comfortable. So tomorrow I'll move another 50,000. A second man laughed softly. Does your wife know about that account? There was a brief silence. Then Marcus answered, without hesitation, without guilt, with a laugh I knew better than my own heartbeat. Angela doesn't even know the account exists. The vacuum slipped from my hand and crashed onto the pavement. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I simply stared at the tiny recorder resting in my palm. For years, Marcus insisted I imagine secrets. Now, less than 60 seconds into one forgotten recording, his own voice had just admitted there were accounts he deliberately kept hidden from me. And somehow, deep inside, I already knew that was only the beginning.
For several minutes, I couldn't move. The parking lot around me carried on as though nothing had happened. A delivery truck backed into a loading space. Someone laughed from a nearby balcony. A dog barked somewhere across the street. Ordinary life continued. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of the past 22 years had just shifted because of one sentence recorded on a forgotten device. Angela doesn't even know the account exists. I replayed it. Then again. Then, one more time, not because I doubted what I had heard, because I couldn't believe how casually Marcus had said it. There was no hesitation, no whisper, no guilt, just confidence, as though hiding money from his wife was no more significant than discussing the weather. I finally forced myself to press pause. My hands were shaking. This can't be the only recording. The screen showed dozens of files. The one I had opened happened to be dated almost 18 months earlier. Without thinking, I selected the recording directly beneath it. A soft click, the sound of a car door closing. Angela again. Another man's voice answered him. I talked to the attorney. Good. We'll need to move everything before she files. Marcus laughed quietly. She won't file. You sound confident. I know Angela. His confidence sounded almost insulting. She still thinks this marriage can be fixed. I felt something inside me crack, not because he was wrong, because he was right. At the time that conversation was recorded, I had still been praying every night that counseling would save our marriage. While I searched for ways to rebuild us, Marcus was apparently discussing ways to protect hidden money before the divorce even began. The second man asked another question. What if she hires a forensic accountant? Marcus answered immediately. She won't. Another pause. She trusts me. Those 3 words hurt more than the hidden accounts, because they were true. I had trusted him, completely. Not because I was foolish, because he spent decades teaching me that trust meant never asking questions. I skipped ahead. Another recording. Different date, different conversation. Marcus sounded as though he were driving. The windshield wipers clicked rhythmically in the background. Move the transfer through the Cayman account first. A different male voice responded. Then Switzerland? Exactly. The conversation continued using financial terms I barely understood. International wires, holding companies, beneficial ownership, asset restructuring. Everything sounded incredibly organized. This wasn't someone making impulsive decisions. This was planning, detailed planning, years of planning. I looked down at the recorder. How many conversations like this existed inside such a tiny piece of plastic? The answer frightened me. I scrolled farther. Nearly 4 years of recordings. Some lasted only 30 seconds. Others stretched almost 40 minutes. Every single one had been recorded while Marcus was driving. It slowly became obvious what he'd been doing. He wasn't secretly recording people. He was recording himself. Important financial conversations, instructions, phone calls through his car's Bluetooth system, probably so he could replay complicated investment details later. The recorder wasn't evidence created against him. It was a business tool, one he simply forgot existed. My heart pounded. I selected another file. This one began with music playing softly through the speakers. Then Marcus answered a phone call. A woman's voice greeted him warmly. I found it. The house? Yes. Marcus laughed. I knew you would. House? I turned the volume higher. It's perfect. The woman sounded excited. 3 bedrooms. Good. Large backyard. Perfect. We'll love it. Will. The word echoed through the tiny speaker. Marcus answered gently. Once everything's finalized, a pause, we won't have to hide anymore. I stopped breathing. The woman laughed. I've already picked out paint colors. Marcus laughed with her. I'll finally have the home we've talked about. I pressed stop. Immediately. I couldn't listen anymore. Not yet.
It wasn't simply another relationship. They were planning a future, a home, a life, while Marcus still came back to ours pretending everything could be repaired. I leaned against the Lexus. The cool metal steadied me. For years, Marcus accused me of imagining betrayal. Meanwhile, he had been documenting it himself. I looked around the empty parking lot. There wasn't another soul nearby. Slowly, another realization settled over me. If these recordings were this damaging, Marcus couldn't know they still existed. Otherwise, he never would have left them inside a car he was trading away. He had forgotten. Completely. The recorder had spent years beneath the driver's seat collecting dust, waiting, silently, preserving every conversation he assumed no one else would ever hear. I placed it carefully inside my purse, then immediately pulled it back out again. No, not my purse. Too risky. Instead, I wrapped it in an old scarf I found in the trunk and tucked it beneath the passenger seat of my own car. Something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about curiosity anymore. This was evidence, potentially important evidence, and I wasn't qualified to decide what mattered. As I drove home, I didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence. My thoughts raced faster than traffic. Should I confront Marcus? Should I call my attorney? Should I keep listening? Halfway home, my phone rang. Marcus. I stared at the screen. After several seconds, I answered. Hi. Everything okay? Yes. You found anything important? His question almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, because neither of us understood its true meaning. A few old things. Nothing valuable? I glanced toward the recording lying beneath my passenger seat. My pulse quickened. No. The lie left my mouth before I had time to think. For the first time in 22 years, I lied to Marcus. Not to manipulate him, not to deceive him, to protect the truth until I understood it. Good. He sounded relieved. The dealership finishes tomorrow. I'll leave everything in the trunk. Thanks. After we hung up, I whispered something aloud that surprised even me. You should have cleaned beneath the driver's seat. By the time I reached home, I knew exactly what my next step would be. I wasn't going to confront Marcus. Not yet. I was going to make copies. Every recording, every file, every second. Because something told me this tiny, forgotten recorder hadn't just preserved hidden conversations. It had preserved the version of Marcus that existed only when he believed no one else was listening. I didn't sleep much that night. The recorder sat inside my bedside drawer, not because I wanted it close, because I didn't want it out of my sight. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus laughing. Angela doesn't even know the account exists. The sentence played over and over inside my head. For years, Marcus insisted I imagined hidden finances. Now his own voice confirmed not only that the accounts existed, but that he deliberately kept them from me. Morning arrived without bringing clarity, only purpose. I made coffee, closed every curtain in the house, placed my laptop on the dining room table, then carefully unwrapped the recorder from the scarf where I'd hidden it. For several moments, I simply stared at it. Such a small object, barely larger than a deck of cards. It looked harmless, almost insignificant. Amazing how something so ordinary could carry enough truth to dismantle years of carefully constructed lies. I searched online for instructions. The recorder connected to my computer with a simple USB cable. Within seconds, a folder opened. 143 audio files. My stomach tightened. 143. Not 3, not 10. 143 separate recordings. The oldest file dated back nearly 4 years, long before Marcus ever suggested separation, long before divorce entered any conversation between us. He had been documenting financial discussions all along. I created a folder on my desktop. Voice recorder backup. then another, second copy. Then I connected an external hard drive. 3 copies. I wasn't taking chances. The files transferred slowly, progress bar crawling across the screen. While I waited, I wrote every file name into a notebook. Dates, times, duration, everything. If years with Marcus had taught me anything, it was that details mattered. When the transfer finally finished, I unplugged the recorder. Nothing had changed. Every file remained intact. Good. Now I could listen without worrying about losing anything. I started from the oldest recording. The first several sounded exactly as I'd expected, Marcus dictating reminders to himself. Meeting locations, client names, interest rates, investment deadlines, completely ordinary. For a brief moment, I wondered whether I had overreacted. Maybe only a few recordings involved hidden money. Then came recording number 12, Marcus speaking alone. Move the Henderson transfer first. Pause. Don't forget to separate personal assets before next quarter. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was reminding himself. The recorder functioned like a spoken notebook. I kept listening. By lunchtime, I noticed a pattern. Every recording fell into 4 categories: business reminders, financial conversations, calls with attorneys, private conversations. It was the 4th category that frightened me most. Around 2 o'clock, another recording began. A woman's laughter filled the speakers. Not loud, gentle, comfortable, intimate. Marcus laughed with her. I miss you. So come over. I can't tonight. Why? A short pause. Angela's home. Silence. Then the woman sighed. How much longer? Marcus answered calmly. Not much. When? As soon as everything's protected. Protected. Not finished. Protected. Even his affair seemed connected to financial planning. The woman asked another question. Are you sure she suspects nothing? Marcus chuckled softly. She questions herself more than she questions me. I froze. The words hit harder than every hidden account. Because he understood exactly what he'd done. He knew. He knew I doubted myself. He knew I apologized unnecessarily. He knew every accusation made me less confident. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was strategy, deliberate, calculated. Years of psychological manipulation summarized in one casual sentence. She questions herself more than she questions me. Tears blurred the computer screen. Not because I still loved him, but because I finally understood something I'd blamed myself for during most of my marriage. I wasn't weak. I had been systematically taught to distrust my own instincts. That realization hurt, but it also set something free inside me. Around 4 o'clock, my attorney, Rebecca Lawson, returned my voicemail. Angela? Hi. You sounded concerned. I found something. What kind of something? I looked toward the recorder. I don't think I should explain over the phone. Her tone immediately changed. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Yes, and bring whatever you found. I will. She paused. Angela? Yes? If you're calling instead of emailing, she chose her words carefully. I'm guessing this is important. I think it is. After we ended the call, I continued listening. Another recording, another attorney, another financial advisor. Every conversation revealed another piece of Marcus's hidden world. Then, just before sunset, I heard something that made my heart race. The second man's voice sounded familiar, very familiar. I replayed the first 30 seconds, again and again. Where had I heard that voice before? Suddenly it came to me. Our backyard barbecue. 2 summers earlier, Marcus introduced one of his business partners. Angela, this is Richard. Richard Collins,
The man who stood in my backyard eating grilled hamburgers. The man who complimented my homemade peach cobbler. The man who smiled politely while shaking my hand. His voice was now discussing hidden transfers with my husband. Reality became even more disturbing. These weren't strangers. Some of these people had stood inside my home, shared meals, celebrated birthdays, looked me in the eyes, all while discussing ways to hide money from me. I closed the laptop. I couldn't absorb another revelation. The room had grown dark without me noticing. Outside, porch lights flickered on throughout the neighborhood. Ordinary families were finishing dinner, watching television, helping children with homework. Meanwhile, I sat alone with 143 recordings proving that the man who constantly accused me of invading his privacy had spent years secretly planning a future I was never meant to know about. I carefully placed the recorder back inside its protective case. Tomorrow, Rebecca Lawson would hear it. Not just my suspicions, not my memories, not my interpretation. Marcus's own voice, clear, confident, undeniable. And for the first time since our marriage began falling apart, I wasn't walking into my attorney's office carrying questions. I was carrying answers. Marcus had unknowingly recorded himself. I arrived at Rebecca Lawson's office 15 minutes early. The recorder rested inside my purse. So did the external hard drive. 3 copies of every audio file. For 22 years, Marcus had always been the organized one. Now I understood why. Details mattered when you were hiding something. I checked in with the receptionist and took a seat near the window. Outside, people hurried along the sidewalk carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Ordinary Thursday morning, ordinary lives. No one passing by could have imagined that inside my purse rested 143 recordings capable of changing the outcome of an entire divorce. Mrs. Carter? Rebecca stood in the doorway. She smiled warmly. Come on in. Her office had always made me feel calm. Books lined one wall, family photographs covered another. A large oak desk stood between 2 comfortable chairs. Nothing about the room felt intimidating. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. She waited until I sat down. So, she folded her hands. What did you find? Without saying a word, I removed the recorder, then the hard drive. Finally, my notebook listing every file. Rebecca frowned. A voice recorder? I found it beneath the driver's seat of Marcus's old car. She looked curious. Have you listened to it? I nodded slowly. Not all of it, but enough. I took a deep breath. He recorded financial conversations. Rebecca remained silent. He discusses hidden accounts. Still silent. Asset transfers. Another pause. And conversations about protecting money before our divorce. The expression on her face changed completely. She leaned forward. Angela? Her voice became very careful. Tell me exactly how you found this. I described everything. The dealership, cleaning the car, vacuuming beneath the driver's seat, pressing play out of curiosity, making copies, listening. She interrupted occasionally. What condition was it in? Dusty. Did you alter any files? No. Did Marcus know you found it? No. Has anyone else listened? Only me. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. When I finished, she reached for the recorder. She didn't press play immediately. Instead, she examined it carefully. Then she looked at me. If these recordings are authentic, she paused. This could become extremely important. I thought so. But we don't assume, she smiled gently. We verify. She called someone into the office. A man in his early 60s introduced himself as Daniel Foster, forensic accountant. Rebecca explained the situation briefly. Daniel adjusted his glasses. Let's hear one. I selected the very first recording I'd ever heard, the one about the hidden account. Marcus's voice filled the room. I'm moving another $50,000 tomorrow. Then the second man. Does your wife know?
Marcus laughed. Angela doesn't even know the account exists. Silence. Rebecca looked toward Daniel. Daniel wasn't looking at either of us. He was writing notes. Finally, he asked, "Play it again." I did. This time he listened with his eyes closed. When it finished, he asked another question. "Do you have financial statements covering that time period?" Rebecca immediately handed him several folders. He compared dates, transfer records, bank statements, tax filings. Everything happened quietly, methodically. No dramatic reactions, no excited declarations, just professionals doing their jobs. Nearly 40 minutes later, Daniel leaned back. "Interesting." Rebecca looked up. "What?" He pointed toward one statement. $50,000 disappeared from a known investment account the same week as this recording. My heart skipped. "But," he continued, "it doesn't appear anywhere else in disclosed assets." Rebecca slowly nodded. "So the recording matches the transaction." "It appears to." Daniel wasn't finished. "Let's try another." We played the Cayman Islands recording. Again, he searched through paperwork. Another transfer, another missing destination. Then the conversation about protecting assets before divorce. More notes, more statements. Finally, Daniel removed his glasses. "I think we have a significant problem," Rebecca asked quietly. "For Marcus?" Daniel nodded. "If these recordings are authenticated," he looked directly at me, "they're consistent with financial activity that was never disclosed." I stared at the table. I had expected confirmation. I wasn't prepared for certainty. Rebecca closed the folders. "We'll need a digital forensic expert." Daniel agreed. Metadata, timestamps, device verification, chain of custody. The conversation became increasingly technical. I understood only pieces. One thing became perfectly clear. Nobody questioned whether the recordings mattered, only how to prove they were genuine. Rebecca turned back toward me. "I need to ask something difficult." "Okay." "When Marcus accused you of invading his privacy," I nodded, "did you ever actually search his devices?" "No." "Track him?" "No." "Install recording software?" "Never." She smiled softly. "I didn't think so." "Why does that matter?" "Because," she gently tapped the recorder, "he created this evidence himself." That sentence echoed through my mind. He created it himself. Not me, not an investigator, not law enforcement. Marcus, the man who spent years insisting I violated his privacy, unknowingly preserved the very truth he tried hardest to conceal. Rebecca carefully placed the recorder into an evidence bag. "She's treating this as original evidence from this point forward." She sealed it, signed the label, recorded the time, every step documented. Watching her work felt strangely comforting. For years, my life had been built on uncertainty. Now, everything depended on facts. Facts don't care who tells the better story. Facts simply exist. Before I left, Rebecca handed me a folder. Inside was a written plan: request expanded financial discovery, petition for forensic accounting, subpoena banking records, authenticate audio recordings, compare recordings against financial timelines. Every step logical, every step organized. As I stood to leave, Rebecca stopped me. "Angela." "Yes?" "I know this is painful." I nodded. "But I want you to remember something." She waited until I met her eyes. "You didn't create this evidence." "No, you simply found it." Outside, sunshine reflected across the parking lot. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Not hope, something stronger. Confidence. Because Marcus spent decades convincing me that my memory couldn't be trusted, my instincts couldn't be trusted, my questions couldn't be trusted. Now, the truth didn't depend on my memory at all. It depended on his own voice. And voices, unlike accusations, don't forget what they said. The next 3 weeks were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For years, my life revolved around uncertainty. Now it revolved around evidence. Every morning, Rebecca's office sent another request, another subpoena, another document to review, another financial institution to contact. I quickly learned something important. Money leaves footprints. People assume numbers disappear because they're transferred electronically. They don't. Every transfer creates another record, another authorization, another destination, another question waiting to be answered. The recordings gave Rebecca and Daniel something priceless, a roadmap. Without Marcus's own words, they would have been searching for hidden assets across thousands of financial transactions. Now they knew exactly where to look. Specific dates, specific amounts, specific countries, specific accounts. It was as though Marcus had narrated his own financial blueprint. One afternoon, Rebecca called. We found the first account. I closed my eyes. The one from the $50,000 recording? Yes. How? The recording gave us the transfer date. She paused. Once we matched that date, the transaction led to another institution, and then another. She laughed quietly. Hidden money rarely stays hidden once someone knows where to begin. I thought back to the recorder. Such a tiny device. Without it, no one would have known where to start. Over the following days, more discoveries surfaced. Investment accounts, corporate entities, foreign transfers. Some accounts had never appeared on our joint tax documents. Others existed under business structures I had never heard Marcus mention. Each discovery matched another recording. Each recording unlocked another financial trail. Daniel eventually explained it in terms I could understand. Think of it like assembling a puzzle. I've always liked puzzles. He smiled. The recordings are the picture on the box. Without them, we'd still have every puzzle piece, but no idea what we were trying to build. For the first time since our separation, I felt something unexpected. Not revenge, relief. Because I wasn't crazy. I never had been. That realization mattered more than the money. Years of self-doubt slowly began dissolving, one confirmed fact at a time. Then Marcus called. It was the first personal call in nearly 2 weeks. Hi? Hi. I heard your attorney requested additional records. Yes. A brief silence followed. Seems excessive. I looked out my kitchen window. Birds gathered around the feeder Caleb built years ago. I'll let the attorneys discuss that. Another pause. You don't trust me anymore. The sentence almost sounded familiar enough to pull me backward. Almost. Instead, I quietly answered, this isn't about trust. Then what is it? Documentation. Silence. Real silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the surprised kind. Marcus had expected another emotional conversation. Instead, he received a practical answer. I've already given you everything. I'll let Rebecca determine that. His tone sharpened slightly. You've changed. I smiled sadly. No, I finally stopped apologizing for asking questions. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he ended the call. For years, that conversation would have left me shaken, wondering whether I'd been unfair, wondering whether I should call back and apologize. This time, I simply placed my phone on the counter and continued making lunch. The difference amazed me. Truth changes more than circumstances. It changes confidence. The following Monday, Daniel invited Rebecca and me to review a preliminary financial report. The conference room table disappeared beneath spreadsheets, flowcharts, corporate ownership diagrams, international transfer summaries. At first glance, everything looked impossibly complicated. Daniel smiled. It only looks confusing. He pointed toward the first chart. Actually, he followed a series of arrows with his pen. It's surprisingly repetitive. Every few months, Marcus transferred money through the same sequence: domestic account, business account, holding company, international investment. Different amounts, same pattern, again and again and again. Then Daniel opened another folder. Inside were printed transcripts from several recordings. The forensic audio specialist had already authenticated dozens of files. Device serial numbers, creation dates, no signs of editing, no manipulation, no missing audio. Everything appeared original. Rebecca looked at me. This is exactly what we hoped for. Daniel nodded. More than hoped. He pointed toward one highlighted sentence, move everything before she files. Then another, she doesn't know the accounts exist. Then another, separate personal assets now. Each sentence matched financial transactions completed within days. The recordings weren't random conversations. They aligned with actual banking activity. That connection transformed suspicion into evidence. Rebecca carefully closed the report. I think Marcus believes this is still a routine divorce. Daniel almost smiled. I don't think it will stay routine. Driving home that afternoon, I passed the church where Marcus and I married 22 years earlier. I almost stopped. Instead, I slowed long enough to look at the front doors. I remembered standing there in my white dress, believing honesty was the easiest promise two people could keep. Funny how life teaches you otherwise. That evening, Jasmine came over carrying takeout. She immediately noticed the stack of financial folders covering my dining room table. Looks serious. It is. She sat beside me. How are you holding up? I thought carefully before answering. I'm grieving. She nodded. But not the way I expected. What do you mean? I looked down at one of the transcripts. I'm not grieving the marriage anymore. She squeezed my hand gently. What are you grieving? I'm grieving the woman who believed every lie was somehow her fault. Tears filled Jasmine's eyes. Mom, I keep thinking about all the times I apologized. I laughed softly. For things I didn't even do. She wrapped her arms around me. I'm glad she's gone. I hugged her back. So am I. Later that night, after Jasmine left, I replayed one recording, not because I needed more evidence, because I needed one reminder. Marcus's voice filled the room, confident, certain. She questions herself more than she questions me. I quietly pressed stop. No, I whispered into the silence. Not anymore. Because somewhere between finding that forgotten recorder and hearing my own attorney explain the evidence, something inside me had finally remembered a truth Marcus spent decades trying to erase. My instincts had never been the problem. The problem was that I'd spent too many years believing someone else's version of reality instead of my own. The deposition was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday morning. I had never given sworn testimony before. Rebecca spent 2 days preparing me. Answer only the question you're asked. I nodded. Don't guess. I won't. If you don't remember something, simply say so. She smiled reassuringly. The evidence will do most of the talking. That sentence comforted me. For most of my marriage, I felt as though I had to defend my own perception of reality. Now I didn't have to convince anyone. Facts speak more clearly than emotions. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early. So did I. The conference room felt colder than I expected. Long, polished table, pitchers of water, stacks of legal files, a court reporter quietly setting up her equipment. Marcus looked exactly as he always had. Perfectly pressed charcoal suit, navy tie, polished shoes, calm expression. If someone walked into the room without knowing our story, they would probably assume he was the attorney instead of the person being questioned. For one brief second, our eyes met. He smiled politely, the same practiced smile that had once reassured me. It no longer had that effect. I smiled back. Not because everything was all right, because I wasn't afraid anymore. The deposition began. Marcus answered routine questions first. Name, business, employment history, income, assets. His responses flowed effortlessly, confident, measured, professional. Years of advising wealthy clients had made him comfortable under pressure. Then Rebecca slowly changed direction. "Mr. Carter," she opened a folder, "do you currently maintain any financial accounts that have not been disclosed during these proceedings?" Marcus answered immediately, "No." "None whatsoever?" "Correct." Rebecca nodded. "Have you ever transferred marital assets into undisclosed accounts?" "No." "Have you ever intentionally concealed financial information from your wife?" Marcus looked directly at her. "Absolutely not." His confidence never wavered. Watching him, I almost admired the performance. Almost. If I hadn't heard the recordings, I might have believed him again. Rebecca calmly continued, "Have you ever discussed hiding assets before your divorce?" "No." "With attorneys?" "No." "Business associates?" "No." "Anyone?" "No." Each answer came faster than the last. The court reporter typed continuously. Click, click, click. Rebecca closed her folder. Very well. She reached into her briefcase, then removed something I recognized instantly, the small black voice recorder. Marcus froze. Only for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. So did Rebecca. "So," she said quietly, "do you recognize this device?" Marcus looked at it carefully. "I don't think so." "You've never seen it before?" "No." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting." She picked up another document. "Our forensic examiner identified this recorder as a model registered under your warranty information 4 years ago." Silence. Marcus swallowed. "I may have owned one." "May have?" "I honestly don't remember." Rebecca slid another document across the table. "Here's the purchase receipt bearing your signature." Marcus glanced at it, then nodded once. "All right, I owned it." Rebecca smiled politely. "Thank you." Then she asked the question that changed the atmosphere in the room. "Mr. Carter," she looked directly at him, "did you use this recorder to preserve business conversations while driving?" Marcus hesitated, just long enough. "Sometimes." "Thank you." She looked toward the court reporter. "Please mark Exhibit 12. My pulse quickened. Rebecca turned toward Marcus again. "Mr. Carter," she spoke with remarkable calm, "is the voice contained in these recordings your own?" Marcus looked at the recorder, then at his attorney. Finally, he answered, "I haven't heard the recordings." "That wasn't my question." Silence. She repeated it. "Is the voice yours?" Another pause. "It appears to be." Rebecca nodded. No further questions on authentication. Marcus's attorney finally spoke. "We object to—" Rebecca gently interrupted. "The foundation has already been established." The room became very quiet. Marcus shifted in his chair. For the first time all morning, he looked uncomfortable. The confident businessman had disappeared. Rebecca pressed a button. The tiny speaker came alive. Static. Traffic. The sound of windshield wipers. Then Marcus's voice. "I'm moving another 50,000 tomorrow." Nobody moved. "Does your wife know?" Marcus's recorded laughter filled the conference room. "Angela doesn't even know the account exists." Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that settles over a room when everyone understands the significance of what they've just heard. Rebecca didn't speak immediately. She simply allowed the recording to exist. Then she asked one quiet question. "Mr. Carter," she looked directly at him, "were you truthful a few moments ago when you testified that no undisclosed accounts existed?" Marcus stared at the table. His attorney leaned over and whispered something. Marcus cleared his throat. Another pause. "I'd like to amend my answer." Rebecca nodded once. No further questions.
The deposition continued for another 2 hours. Additional recordings, additional documents, additional inconsistencies. Marcus answered fewer questions directly as the morning went on. His attorney objected more frequently. But something irreversible had already happened. The image Marcus carefully maintained had begun to crack. Afterwards, Rebecca and I walked quietly toward the car parking garage. Neither of us spoke until we reached the elevator. Finally, she smiled. "You did well. I barely said anything." "Exactly." She looked at me. "You didn't need to." I understood what she meant. For 22 years, Marcus convinced me that nobody would believe my concerns, that I lacked evidence, that I misunderstood. Today, I hardly spoke at all. His own words had spoken for me. As I drove home through steady rain, I realized something almost poetic. Marcus spent years accusing me of trying to spy on him, of invading his privacy, of searching for secrets that didn't exist. Yet the only person who had secretly documented years of deception was Marcus himself. Sometimes justice arrives not because someone uncovers the truth. Sometimes it arrives because the truth patiently waits until the person who created it forgets where they left it. The settlement conference was scheduled 2 weeks after Marcus's deposition. By then, everything had changed. Not publicly. Most people still believed ours was an ordinary divorce between two people who had simply grown apart. Friends continued sending polite messages. Neighbors smiled and waved. Church members asked whether Marcus was doing well. Very few people knew what had actually happened, and I intended to keep it that way. I no longer felt any desire to embarrass him. The truth didn't need an audience. It only needed to exist. Rebecca arrived carrying 3 thick binders, each one labeled carefully: financial timeline, audio evidence, forensic analysis. Daniel Foster joined us a few minutes later with additional reports. He looked unusually satisfied. "I think we found the last account." Rebecca smiled. "The offshore investment?" Daniel nodded. "It wasn't directly in Marcus's name." "In whose?" "A holding company." He opened another folder, which was controlled by another company. Another page, which ultimately traced back to Marcus. I shook my head. How many steps? 5. 5 companies? 5 layers. He looked almost impressed. "Someone spent years building this structure," Rebecca added quietly, "and several minutes for getting a voice recorder beneath a driver's seat." For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A genuine laugh. The irony was almost unbelievable. Marcus built an incredibly sophisticated financial system: international accounts, corporate entities, legal structures, professional advisors, years of planning. Yet the entire structure began collapsing because of a device smaller than my cell phone. The settlement conference began shortly afterward. Marcus looked different, not physically, emotionally. His confidence had faded. He no longer smiled automatically. He rarely made eye contact. His attorney did most of the talking. "We're prepared to negotiate." Rebecca nodded. "So are we." For several hours, numbers moved across spreadsheets: retirement accounts, real estate, investment portfolios, business interests. Assets I had never known existed were suddenly discussed as though everyone had always known about them. Every time Marcus's attorney questioned a figure, Rebecca calmly opened another transcript, another recording, another financial report. The objections became less frequent as the afternoon continued. Eventually, Marcus asked for a private break. Both legal teams stepped into separate conference rooms. While Rebecca reviewed paperwork, I stood beside the window overlooking downtown. Cars moved slowly through afternoon traffic. Thousands of people continued living ordinary lives, completely unaware that one forgotten recorder had just rewritten mine. Rebecca joined me. "You all right?" "I've been thinking." "About what?"
If I hadn't cleaned beneath that seat, she smiled gently. You did. I almost didn't, but you did. She paused. We spend too much time wondering about the paths we never took. I nodded. The important one is the path you're standing on. Before I could answer, someone knocked. Marcus wanted to speak with me. Alone. Rebecca looked at me. You don't have to. I know. After thinking for a moment, I agreed. Marcus entered the small conference room carrying only a bottle of water. No attorney, no files, just himself. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. I never thought you'd find it. The recorder? He nodded. I forgot it even existed. I know. He looked down at the floor. I kept wondering how Rebecca found everything. I almost smiled. You told her. His expression tightened. I told myself. Exactly. Another long silence settled between us. Then Marcus said something I hadn't expected. I wasn't trying to hurt you. The old version of me would have accepted those words, maybe even apologized for doubting them. This version of me simply asked, which part? He looked confused. Hiding the accounts? The affair? The offshore companies? The years of telling me I imagined everything? I paused. Which part wasn't meant to hurt me? He had no answer, not because one didn't exist, because none of them did. Instead, he quietly asked, Do you hate me? The question surprised me. I considered it honestly. No. You don't? I shook my head. I hate what happened. Another pause. I hate that I spent years believing there was something wrong with me. His shoulders slumped. But I don't hate you. He looked relieved. Then I continued. I just don't trust the person you chose to become. The relief disappeared because he understood the difference. Love can sometimes survive disappointment. Trust rarely survives deliberate deception. Marcus sat quietly for several seconds. Then he asked one final question. When did you stop believing me? I thought carefully. It wasn't when I found the recorder. He frowned. It was when I heard you say, I looked directly into his eyes. She questions herself more than she questions me. His face changed instantly. He remembered the recording. I realized something. What? You knew exactly what you were doing. I spoke calmly. You weren't simply lying. You were teaching me not to trust myself. Marcus closed his eyes. I never meant... No, I interrupted gently. Don't tell me what you meant. We've spent too many years talking about intentions. I stood up. Actions already answered the question. I walked toward the door. Before opening it, I turned back one last time. For years, I smiled sadly. You kept asking why I didn't trust you. He looked up. The truth is, I rested my hand on the doorknob. I trusted you so completely that I stopped trusting myself. His eyes filled with tears. Mine didn't. Not because I didn't feel nothing, because I had already cried those tears long before. I opened the door. Rebecca looked up from her files. Everything all right? I nodded. Yes. And for the first time since our marriage began falling apart, the answer was completely true. Because no matter what happened next, Marcus could never again convince me that reality was something other than what it was. His own voice had made sure of that. The trial lasted only 3 days. That surprised almost everyone. Not because the case was simple, because the evidence was. Rebecca explained it perfectly the evening before opening arguments. There are cases built on opinions. I nodded. There are cases built on memories. Another nod. And then she placed a transcript on the conference table. There are cases built on someone's own words. She gently tapped the page. Those are much harder to explain away. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. High ceilings, dark wooden benches, the state seal hanging behind the judge's bench, quiet conversations echoing softly until the bailiff called everyone to order. Marcus sat across the aisle wearing another perfectly tailored suit. For years, that image represented confidence to me. Now it reminded me of performance. His attorney opened by arguing that the recordings lacked context. Business conversations can easily be misunderstood. Rebecca didn't object. She simply made a note. I had learned something important while working with her. She never interrupted weak arguments. She preferred answering them with stronger evidence. Throughout the morning, accountants testified, bank representatives, digital forensic specialists, one after another. Each witness confirmed another piece of the puzzle. The recorder belonged to Marcus. The files had not been edited. The dates matched financial transfers. The voices matched known recordings of Marcus speaking. The accounts existed. The transfers occurred. The timelines aligned. Facts, not assumptions. Facts. By the second afternoon, Marcus took the witness stand. He looked tired, older somehow, not physically, emotionally. Rebecca approached slowly. She carried only a thin folder, no dramatic stack of papers, no complicated charts, just a single transcript. "Mr. Carter," she smiled politely, "you testified yesterday that your wife misunderstood your financial planning. Yes? And you maintain that position today?" "I do." Rebecca nodded. "Let's discuss one sentence." She looked down briefly, then read aloud. "Angela doesn't even know the account exists." The courtroom became completely silent. She looked back at Marcus. "Did you say those words?" Marcus shifted in his chair. "Yes." "Were they accurate?" Another pause. "At the time, please answer yes or no." "Yes." Rebecca nodded again. "Was the account disclosed during your marriage?" "No." "Was it disclosed during your initial financial filings?" Marcus looked toward his attorney. The judge spoke before anyone else could. "You may answer." "No." Rebecca thanked him quietly, then turned another page. "Move everything before she files." She looked up. "Who were you referring to?" "My wife." "Were you discussing divorce?" "Yes." "Were you discussing moving assets before divorce?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes." No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just one honest answer after another. Each answer dismantled another defense. Then Rebecca reached the final page. I recognized the sentence immediately, the one that had changed everything for me. "She questions herself more than she questions me." Rebecca looked directly at Marcus. "What did you mean by that?" For the first time during the entire trial, Marcus couldn't answer immediately. Seconds passed. The silence felt enormous. Finally, he spoke. His voice cracked. "I knew Angela trusted me." Rebecca waited. "I took advantage of that." No one moved. Not the judge, not the attorneys, not even the spectators sitting quietly in the gallery. Marcus continued speaking. "I convinced myself," he swallowed hard, "that if she doubted herself," he couldn't finish. The sentence remained unfinished. It didn't need completion. Everyone understood. Rebecca returned to counsel table without another question. She didn't need one. Marcus had just admitted under oath what I spent years trying to explain to myself. It wasn't only financial deception, it was emotional manipulation. The judge requested closing arguments the following morning. Marcus's attorney did his best. He emphasized business complexity, poor judgment, stress, human mistakes. Rebecca stood last. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. Instead, she walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom. "This case," she began quietly, "is not about complicated accounting." She held up the tiny black recorder. "It's about truth." The courtroom remained silent. "For years," she continued, "Mrs. Carter was repeatedly told she imagined problems." She paused. "She was accused of being suspicious." Another pause. "She was told she invaded privacy." Then she carefully placed the recorder on the evidence table. "In the end," her voice softened, "the only person who documented years of deception," she looked toward Marcus, "was the man committing it." She returned to her seat. Nothing more. Nothing else needed saying. The judge recessed briefly before delivering his decision. Those 15 minutes felt longer than the previous 3 days. I sat quietly beside Rebecca, hands folded, heart calm, strangely calm, not because I knew what would happen, because I finally understood something. Regardless of the ruling, Marcus could never erase the truth again. The judge returned. Everyone stood, then sat. His written opinion lasted nearly 40 minutes. He discussed disclosure obligations, fiduciary responsibilities, financial transparency, expert testimony. Finally, he reached the conclusion. "The court finds clear evidence that marital assets were intentionally concealed." I closed my eyes briefly. "The respondent's own recorded statements," the judge looked toward Marcus, "substantially undermined the credibility of his testimony." The remainder of the decision addressed financial remedies, undisclosed assets, recalculated property division, attorney's fees, additional sanctions. Numbers filled several pages, important numbers, life-changing numbers, yet I barely heard them because one sentence echoed louder than everything else. The respondent's own recorded statements. Not my accusations, not my suspicions, not my interpretation, his own words. When court adjourned, people quietly gathered their belongings. Rebecca smiled warmly. "We're done." I looked around the courtroom one last time. For years, I believed I would need the perfect argument to prove what I'd experienced. Instead, the truth required only one forgotten recorder and one man who never imagined he'd someday have to listen to himself. The weeks after the trial felt strangely quiet. For more than a year, my life had revolved around attorneys, accountants, court dates, depositions, and financial documents. Then, almost overnight, it was over. No more phone calls from Rebecca asking me to review another statement. No more emails from Daniel explaining another financial trail. No more nights spent listening to recordings that had once shattered my understanding of my marriage. Silence returned. This time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. One Saturday morning, I carried a cardboard box into my home office. Inside were copies of nearly everything from the case: financial reports, court filings, transcripts, expert opinions. The recorder itself had already been returned after the legal proceedings concluded. Rebecca suggested keeping it in a secure place. "Not because you'll need it again," she smiled, "but because it reminds you of something important." She was right. I placed the tiny black recorder inside a fireproof lockbox along with the court judgment. Then I closed the lid. Some memories deserve preserving, not because we want to relive them, because we never want to forget what they taught us. Later that afternoon, Jasmine stopped by with coffee and blueberry muffins. She noticed the empty boxes stacked near the hallway. "So," she smiled, "does this mean you're finally finished?" "I think so." She looked around the house. "It feels different." "It does. What changed?" I thought for a moment. "I'm not waiting anymore." "For what?" for the next lie. She nodded slowly. I used to watch every conversation, I admitted quietly, trying to figure out whether I misunderstood something. Now I believe myself. Jasmine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. I laughed softly. I wish I'd learned this 20 years ago. She smiled. Maybe. Then she gently shook her head. But you learned it. That afternoon, Caleb called while driving home from work. Mom, hi, sweetheart. How are you really? The question made me smile. Really? Really? I looked through the kitchen window toward the backyard. The old oak tree still stood exactly where Marcus and I planted it when Jasmine was 5. Some things survive storms. I'm peaceful. You sound different. I feel different. He hesitated. I've been thinking about something. What? When we were kids, his voice grew quieter. Dad always seemed so certain. I knew exactly what he meant. Marcus rarely doubted himself, never hesitated, always had an answer. I used to think confidence meant someone was right, Caleb continued. Now I realize confidence and honesty aren't the same thing. His words stayed with me long after we hung up. That evening, I opened one of my old journals. The earliest entries broke my heart. Page after page filled with self-doubt. Maybe I overreacted. Perhaps I misunderstood. I shouldn't have asked. I need to trust Marcus more. I kept turning pages. The pattern repeated for years. Not once did I write, maybe my instincts are right. Not once. I closed the journal gently. Then I opened a brand new notebook. The first page remained blank for several minutes. Finally, I wrote one simple sentence. My feelings deserve my attention before they deserve my apology. I underlined it once, no more. The following week, Rebecca invited me to lunch, not to discuss the case, just lunch. Halfway through the meal, she smiled. You know, what? I've been practicing law for almost 30 years. I can imagine the stories. She laughed. There are plenty. Then her expression softened. But your case reminded me of something. What? Evidence solves legal questions. She paused. Healing solves personal ones. I stirred my tea quietly. I think I'm finally beginning the second part. I think you are too. Before we left the restaurant, Rebecca handed me a small gift. Inside was a beautiful leather journal. The first page contained a handwritten note. Never let someone else's certainty become louder than your own truth. I felt tears fill my eyes. Not sad tears, grateful ones. That evening, I walked through my house room by room. The living room where Marcus once insisted I imagined problems, the kitchen where ordinary conversations somehow became accusations against my character, the dining room where I spent years apologizing simply to keep the peace. The walls hadn't changed, the furniture hadn't moved, yet everything felt different because the woman living inside those walls had changed. For years, I believed strength meant keeping a marriage together. Now I understood something deeper. Strength sometimes means refusing to surrender your own reality. The recorder hadn't given me courage, it had given me confirmation. The courage had quietly existed inside me all along. Someone had simply been convincing me not to trust it. As the sun disappeared beyond the backyard fence, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. Birds settled into the trees. Children laughed somewhere down the street. Life continued exactly as it always had. Ordinary, simple, beautiful. For the first time in decades, nothing inside me felt divided. I wasn't wondering whether I misunderstood. I wasn't replaying conversations, searching for mistakes. I wasn't preparing another apology. I was simply present, and that felt like freedom. Sometimes people think justice is winning in court. Sometimes it is, but the greatest victory isn't hearing a judge believe you. It's finally believing yourself. That was the judgment I had needed all along, and no courtroom could have given it to me.
1 year later, I parked my car in the driveway after returning from the grocery store. For a moment, I simply sat behind the steering wheel. The engine was off. The neighborhood was quiet. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Someone nearby was mowing a lawn. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the open window. An ordinary afternoon, exactly the kind of afternoon I once rushed through without noticing. Funny how peace changes your relationship with ordinary moments. A year earlier, silence made me anxious. Now it made me grateful. I picked up my shopping bags and walked toward the front door. The same house, the same porch, the same flower beds I planted years ago. Only one thing was different: the woman coming home. The divorce had been finalized for months. The financial issues were resolved. The court's decision had become part of the past. Marcus paid what the court required. Some of the hidden assets were recovered. Others had already disappeared into investments that could never be fully untangled. Rebecca warned me that complete justice isn't always possible. The law can correct many things, she told me, but it can't return time. She was right. I would never recover the years I spent questioning my own instincts, but I refused to spend another year mourning them. Those years had taught me something too valuable to waste. I unlocked the front door. Inside, sunlight poured across the hardwood floors. The house no longer felt like a place where lies had lived. It felt like a place where truth had finally been welcomed. Jasmine and Caleb arrived later that afternoon. Sunday dinners had quietly become our new tradition. Nothing elaborate, just homemade food, long conversations, laughter that no longer felt forced. As we finished eating, Caleb smiled. "I've got something for you." He reached into his backpack and handed me a small gift box. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a delicate silver keychain shaped like a tiny voice recorder. I laughed through unexpected tears. "You two planned this?" Jasmine grinned. "It wasn't easy finding one." I turned the little charm over in my hand. On the back, tiny engraved words caught the light. "Truth doesn't forget." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, I whispered, "I'll carry this every day." "And not because of Dad," Caleb said gently, "but because of what you became." I closed my fingers around the tiny charm. He was right. The recorder was never really the hero of my story. Truth was. Courage was. Healing was. A few weeks later, Rebecca invited me to speak at a small community workshop for women rebuilding their lives after divorce. At first, I almost declined. "I don't know what I'd say." She smiled. "You don't need to be a lawyer. You just need to tell the truth." The room wasn't large, perhaps 30 women, different ages, different backgrounds, different stories. Yet when I looked into their faces, I recognized something familiar: uncertainty. The same uncertainty I carried for years. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't begin with the court case, or the hidden money, or even the recorder. I began with one sentence. For years, I believed the problem was that I asked too many questions. The room became very quiet. I eventually learned, I smiled gently, the real problem was that I stopped believing I deserved answers. Several women wiped away tears, not because my story was unique, because it wasn't. After the meeting ended, an elderly woman approached me. She held my hand tightly. I needed to hear that. "So did I admitted. "It just took me 22 years. She smiled. "Sometimes wisdom arrives late. Better late than never." Exactly. Driving home that evening, I reached for my keys. The tiny recorder charm caught the sunset. It sparkled for just a second, then settled quietly against the steering wheel. I smiled. Marcus often asked why I didn't trust him. For years, I searched for the perfect answer.
Now I finally had one. Trust isn't destroyed by one lie. It's destroyed when someone repeatedly teaches you to ignore your own reality. The opposite is true as well. Healing doesn't begin because someone apologizes. Healing begins the moment you decide your own voice deserves to be heard. That tiny forgotten recorder had exposed hidden accounts, hidden plans, hidden relationships, but it exposed something even more important, the truth about me. I was never controlling. I was never paranoid. I was never imagining problems. I was simply living beside someone who benefited from my self-doubt. Once I understood that, everything changed. Sometimes people ask whether I still have the recorder. I do, locked safely away, not because I need evidence anymore. The court already heard it. I keep it because it reminds me of something I never want to forget. Truth doesn't always arrive through dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it waits patiently beneath the driver's seat of an old car, covered in dust, forgotten by the very person who created it, waiting for the day someone finally presses play. Looking back now, I don't believe that little recorder changed my life. My life began changing the moment I decided to believe what I heard instead of what I had been told. The recorder simply gave my instincts a voice no one could deny. And once the truth finally spoke, it never needed to raise its volume again, because the strongest evidence isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the quiet recording that has been telling the truth all along.